Today's story takes us to Australia, specifically to a city called Cairns. In 2014, when the events of this story took place, a woman named Rina lived there with her 8 children. Rina had been married and divorced several times, and in every marriage, she had a few children. Some of her kids were born out of wedlock. The fathers of these children had abandoned them, some provided financial support, but they rarely visited their kids. Rina didn't mind, she worked hard to provide for her children. She played the role of both mother and father, handling everything on her own. She raised her children well, teaching them good manners and values. The family was well liked in their neighborhood. Whenever one of the kids caused trouble or annoyed a neighbor, Rina would go and apologize personally. In short, they were a beloved family, and everyone admired them. Rina's eldest son, Louis, reached the age of 18 in 2012 and decided to move out to start his independent life. Rina encouraged him and supported his decision, wanting him to build his future. Despite moving out, Louis visited his family every morning to check on them and spend time with his siblings. They were a tight-knit, cooperative, and united family, with no apparent issues. However, one day, without any warning, the family faced a heartbreaking tragedy. On December 19, 2014, the Cairns Police Department received a distressing call. The caller, crying and struggling to speak, was clearly terrified. It was Louis, Rina's eldest son, who was 20 years old at the time. He explained that he had woken up that morning, gone to his mother's house to have breakfast with his siblings, and found the house eerily quiet. Normally, his siblings would be playing in the garden while their mother prepared breakfast. When Louis entered the house, he found his mother lying in the living room, covered in blood. Horrified, he ran out of the house and called the police. Shortly after, both the police and an ambulance arrived. Rina was still alive but in critical condition, having been stabbed over 35 times in her chest, abdomen, back, and face. The police, fearing that the attacker might still be in the house, entered cautiously, their weapons drawn. When they searched the children's rooms, they were met with a devastating sight. Every room had a child lying motionless, their small bodies stabbed repeatedly. All 8 children, 4 boys and 4 girls, were found dead. One of the girls wasn't Rina's daughter but her niece. The ages of the children ranged from 14 years old to just 18 months. None of them had seen much of life, and all were brutally murdered. Outside the house, Louis waited anxiously, hoping the police would bring out his siblings alive, but that wasn't what happened. One of the officers who came out of the house approached Louis and broke the devastating news to him: all 7 of his siblings and his cousin had been murdered. You can imagine Louis's state, he screamed and cried in disbelief. Just the day before, he had visited them, and everything was laughter and joy. Now, they were all gone. The sole survivor was his mother, Rina, but her condition was extremely critical, and her life hung by a thread. The 8 bodies were taken for autopsy, and Louis was called in to identify each one. Already shattered from finding his mother in such a state, he now had to face his siblings' bodies. The first body he saw was that of one of his sisters, but he couldn't bring himself to see the others. After some time, he returned to finish identifying them, despite the unbearable pain. This case shocked the entire nation of Australia. People were horrified by the massacre, which took the lives of 8 young children just days before Christmas. What was supposed to be a season of celebration turned into a time of sorrow. Even the absent fathers of the children, who had abandoned them, came to mourn, crying hysterically when they heard the news. A funeral was held for the children, attended by more than 4,000 people, including Australia's Prime Minister. Seeing the small coffins, some even smaller depending on the child's size, broke everyone's hearts. The police now had one mission: to find the monster responsible for this inhuman act. The house was sealed off as a crime scene, and the police began their investigation, combing every inch of the house for evidence. Surprisingly, they found nothing: no foreign fingerprints, no signs of forced entry. The only fingerprints found were those of the family members. This suggested that the killer might have been someone the family knew, someone they trusted enough to let into their home. The police's first suspicion fell on Louis, the eldest son. After all, he was the one who discovered the crime scene. When questioned, Louis explained that he had been out with friends the night before and returned home late. He said he didn't stop by his mother's house until the next morning, when he found the horrifying scene. To verify his alibi, the police questioned Louis's friends, who confirmed his story. Even neighbors testified that they had seen him return home that night. Security camera footage from a neighbor's house also showed Louis entering and leaving his home during the night. This cleared Louis as a suspect. The police then asked Louis if his mother had any enemies who might want to harm her or the family. He replied that his mother was a kind woman who avoided conflicts and focused solely on her children. She was loved by everyone. The investigation moved to questioning the neighbors. One neighbor mentioned seeing Rina and her children awake and playing in the yard around 2 a.m. on the night of the crime. The neighbor found it odd that they were awake at such a late hour but dismissed it, thinking they might be enjoying the holiday season. The timeline of the crime was narrowed down to between 2 a.m. and the following morning when Louis found them. Despite this information, the police still had no solid leads. The only person who might have answers was Rina, but she was still in critical condition in the hospital. Doctors performed multiple surgeries on Rina, who had suffered severe internal injuries and lost a significant amount of blood. During her treatment, the doctors noticed something strange about her wounds and immediately informed the police. The wounds didn't align with being inflicted by an external attacker. The angles of the stab wounds suggested that Rina had inflicted them on herself. This revelation shocked the investigators. When Rina regained consciousness, the police questioned her. The first question they asked was, "Did you kill your children?" Rina replied, "Yes," before closing her eyes and falling into a coma again. Further investigation revealed the extent of Rina's actions. On the night of the tragedy, she had stabbed herself 35 times after killing her children. But her right hand didn't have a single stab wound because that was the hand she used to hold the knife and strike. When the doctors discovered this and checked all her surgeries, they called the police and showed them photos. That's when the events of the entire case unfolded. It turned out that Rina had inflicted all those stabs on herself, meaning she was the one who stabbed her children 7 times and also her niece. Most likely, she stabbed herself in the head to make it look like she was a victim of the crime too. But what kind of mother can bring herself to kill all her children in such a horrific way? Some of them even tried to run away. When they thought carefully about it, they considered the possibility that this woman suffered from a severe mental illness, which drove her to do this. That same afternoon I mentioned earlier, the police went to ask the neighbors about Rina's relationship with her children. As I told you, they all said it was good and normal. Even her son testified, saying the same thing, that they had never seen anything wrong from her. This indicated that Rina didn't kill her children willingly but was likely mentally ill. When they went to the hospital and asked her, "Did you kill your children?" she answered, "Yes." They wanted to ask more questions, but her health condition was deteriorating, and they had to dig deeper and investigate further. They wanted to confirm whether this woman was a psychopath with no emotions or if she truly suffered from a mental illness like schizophrenia. After that, a neighbor who lived very close to Rina came to the police and informed them that she remembered something. She told them that on the evening before the night of the crime, she saw Rina walking alone in an empty street, wandering around as if she were talking to herself. The neighbor said she approached her and asked what was wrong. Rina replied that her daughter was out with friends and would be back soon, but she suddenly stopped talking and didn't return home. That same afternoon, the neighbor recalled Rina saying, "If anyone wants to harm my children, I will harm them first. If anyone wants to take them, I'll be the one to kill them first." The neighbor asked her, "What did you say?" and Rina replied, "Nothing, I was just talking to myself." The police were now certain that this woman was mentally ill. When they examined her psychological records, they found that she likely entered a dissociative state that night and killed her children. But the question now was whether anyone had ever noticed she was mentally ill. On the contrary, she appeared normal. The police searched her medical records to see if she had ever visited a doctor for schizophrenia or similar conditions, and the shocking discovery was that Rina had experienced similar episodes even before she had children. She had visited the hospital, but her condition was never taken seriously, and she was never given any medication. She had been fighting her battles internally. To relieve her mind, she would sometimes visit monks and tell them strange, illogical things, such as that she was chosen by God to be his successor on earth and that the world was about to end. Rina tried to hide these things from people so they wouldn't call her crazy. Over time, her mental health worsened. Adding to her psychological struggles, she was also facing financial difficulties, raising 3 children on her own. Although some fathers provided child support, it wasn't enough. She couldn't afford to go out to relax because there was no one to look after her children. 2 weeks later, Rina recovered, and the police needed to interrogate her to understand what happened. They knew she wasn't in her right mind, so during her questioning, a psychiatrist accompanied them to monitor her condition. Normally, when a criminal kills their children in this way, they would go straight into the interrogation room, and the investigators would apply pressure on them. But with Rina, they took it slow and carefully because they knew she didn't act of her own free will. When she sat down, they asked her, "Why did you kill your children and your niece?" She replied, "That night, I received a message from heaven saying the world was going to end, and I didn't want my children to know what was going to happen. I killed them so they could go straight to paradise." They asked her, "Your neighbors said they saw your children playing in the yard that night." She replied, "Yes, I let them play to enjoy their last moments. After they finished playing, I sent each one to their room and waited until they all fell asleep. Then I started stabbing them one by one until they were all dead." They asked her, "Did any of them wake up while you were killing them?" She said, "Yes, some of them woke up and tried to run away, but I caught them and finished them off." Indeed, some of her children, who were sleeping in the same room, were found stabbed in the back. This indicated that they probably tried to escape, but she caught them before they could leave. She concluded by saying, "After I finished all of that, I started stabbing myself so I could die too, but I didn't." In 2017, nearly 3 years after the massacre, Rina's trial began, and in the end, she was sentenced to stay in a mental institution for the rest of her life. Even though it was proven that she didn't act willingly and was mentally ill, she was deemed a danger to society and had to be isolated to prevent her from harming anyone in the future. If her condition improves significantly and she is no longer a threat to anyone, they might consider releasing her, but it's very unlikely. As for her house, where the massacre took place, the state decided to demolish it because no one would ever want to live there. They built a small memorial on the site to remember the children. It included 8 small graves, 1 for each child, and people began visiting the site, leaving flowers and toys. Her son Louis, the first to find his mother wounded and his siblings all dead, said he forgives her because it wasn't her choice. He blames himself for leaving and wonders if he could have prevented it had he been home. He dreams of his siblings hiding behind him while their mother is coming after them. This case serves as a harsh reminder of the importance of taking mental health seriously. If anyone feels unwell or notices strange behavior in themselves or those around them, they should seek help from a psychiatrist before the situation escalates. And that wraps up our story for today, but remember, the thrill doesn't end here. If you're passionate about mysteries, gripping investigations, and the most intriguing police stories, make sure to subscribe to the best police stories. Join us to dive into a world where every case is a puzzle waiting to be solved, every twist will keep you guessing, and every episode will leave you wanting more. Don't miss out, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you'll never miss an episode. See you next time, where suspense and mystery await.